is ACFID as an organization, and also as to why, as an organization, RAWCS is becoming a member of ACFID. One of the reasons why we are becoming a member of ACFID is that we would like to have access to funding from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade under their ANCP program. We'll also speak about what is that ANCP and how does that benefit projects that are done through RAWCS. We'll also speak about the process that we are going through, or majority of that has already happened internally at RAWCS to become a member of ACFID. And then we'll also cover principles on which the whole of membership of ACFID operate when they go overseas and they do international development projects. We'll toward the end speak about the main policies and frameworks that we have developed in alignment with ACFID requirements. Just so you're aware, in 2024, whole of 40 different policies and frameworks were developed to ensure that we were meeting all the requirements that ACFID members are required to have. And then, as I said earlier, there's a Q&A session toward the end, but do not hold on your questions. You can ask them and type them away, and I'll be stopping from time to time to get John Robertson to tell me what those questions are. So with that, we launch. First thing first, the Australian Council for International Development, which is the acronym for ACFID is the acronym for that, is an independent Australian organization that is bringing Australian organizations that operate overseas in the international development space together. So it's a membership organization, and it's been around for, I believe, probably now for about 70 or so years. I just see that John has started the recording again. I thought that he had started earlier, but I see it now again. So anyway, so the Australian Council for International Development, or ACFID, is an independent national association of Australian non-government organizations, which is also sometimes referred to as the NFP, not-for-profit organizations, working in the field of international aid and development. That's a quick introduction to what ACFID is. When we started this process of becoming a member of ACFID at the request of the board of RAWCS earlier last year, I was speaking with ACFID and telling them that we'd like to apply to become a member. And the CEO of ACFID at the time, Mark Prussell, was telling me, "Oh, you're rejoining." And I was a bit surprised as to why he was saying rejoining. I said, no, this is the first time we're doing this because I was not aware. Then he said, no, our records show that you're actually a member of ACFID. And it actually did turn out that we were a member of ACFID in the 1990s. So at the time, we had all these best practice policies in place, because otherwise we would have not become a member of ACFID then. And then something strange had happened at the time, because of which we had not renewed, or the membership had lapsed. I don't know the story there. But just so you're aware that this is not first time that we are becoming a member of ACFID. We were actually there about 25, 30 years ago as well, which is actually quite extraordinary when you think of RAWCS' history as an organization that it has done some great work in the past. Moving forward, one of the things that I wanted to cover today is to say to cover to why we want to become a member of ACFID. Yes, we did hear about what ACFID is. It's a consortium or a membership organization or association of not-for-profit organizations that are Australian but operate overseas. Yes, great. But what is the benefit of joining an alliance or a group of organizations like that? So I'll go through the 5 main points as to why we are becoming a member of ACFID. First thing first, it is giving us access to the not-for-profit organizations that are of Australian origin that operate overseas. And being part of that community means that we actually are able to then work with these organizations down the line in countries we operate. As you are aware, we have operations right now around in 45 countries, including Australia. So all those 44 countries overseas that we operate in, there are other not-for-profit organizations of Australian origin that operate there as well. And it's important to be part of that community and to have access to that community. The second thing is about influence. Once we are a member of a collective like that of all major Australian not-for-profit organizations operating overseas, it would mean that we would have the collective wisdom and collective power to go and potentially influence Australian government policy. For example, you may have heard that about 10, 15 years ago, we were able as an organization volunteers were able that were part of RAWCS projects who were going overseas to claim their travel as tax deductible in some way, shape, or form. Whether that was actually endorsed by government or not, that's a different point. But one of the things that I personally am keen once we become a member of ACFID is that we work with other not-for-profit organizations of Australian origin who also send a large number of volunteers overseas to work on international development projects so that we can collectively go and request the government to consider allowing for those people to claim their travel for these development work trips as tax deductible. Again, it will be in the government's hands to decide whether that is possible or no, but there's no harm in trying to convince the government, especially if we are part of a big alliance like that. We sent, I think, about if I remember correctly, 673 volunteers last year. I believe I saw Merv, I think earlier today, if he's here, if that number is incorrect, please correct me, Merv. But I thought that we sent a large number of volunteers in. And interestingly, since COVID, our number of volunteers been increasingly going up year after year, which means that there's more and more need for us as an organization to try to influence government policy in terms of getting that tax deductibility for overseas aid and international development trips. The other reason is being part of ACFID, which is an organization that sets best practice in international development. We'll have access to compliance standards, and we'll also have access to tools and trainings. For some of you who have been involved with us as part of a committee, which I'll speak about later, who are going through these ACFID requirements and all that, they know firsthand that there are some fantastic best practice requirements that ACFID has put in place, and that will only actually raise our quality of international development work, if anything. So having access to best practice is another reason why we are joining ACFID. Also, because not-for-profit sector overseas is quite kind of like competitive in certain areas, but also at the time there are so many partnerships that one can actually build there, especially with organizations that originate from Australia. Of course, when we go overseas, work in Nepal or in other countries, there are all these aid organizations from other parts of the world, the United States, Europe, and other places, but also there are organizations from Australian base, and it is important for us to actually have access to those organizations to build partnerships with, because it can only amplify the impact that we are having as an organization. Something that can be done alone may not have as much impact as it may be done with partnerships. So therefore, that's another reason why we're doing this. And then finally, again, these 5 reasons that I've collated here are not, this is not an exhaustive list.
Sent it to Alan, I know I have.
This is not an exhaustive list, but another reason why, as an organization, we have decided to become a member of ACFID is because it will give us access to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's ANCP program. And that ANC program is the one that actually gives organization access to funding by the Australian government if you're operating overseas. I'll speak about that in a moment. But these are kind of like the main reasons why we wanted to become a member of ACFID. So I'll pause here and check if there are any questions before I proceed. Let me quickly check the chat button here. I don't see any questions.
No questions, Mahir.
Okay. So either I have been so good in explaining
No
this
questions.
that there are no questions, or that you have not been able to hear my voice. So whatever the case is, let's proceed. But as I said, please type away any questions that you may have. Okay. So what is ANCP? ANCP is the Australian government's partnership with not-for-profit organizations of Australian background that operate overseas. It stands for, if I'm not mistaken, Australian Non-Government Organizations Cooperation Program. It is run by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and it is actually also a soft way of saying that the Australian government, of course, has missions and embassies overseas. And if Australians are going, Rotarians are going and operating in those countries, then it is actually good to have access to not only government funding in those places, but also access to the embassy and the mission staff, especially in time of need, when God forbid, if something happens in those countries, if we are connected with the embassies and with the missions there, then we'll have access to them quickly for our volunteers and all that. Just to also shed a bit more light on this is organizations, once they are fully endorsed by ACFID as a member, and then there's a separate but similar process that you need to then apply for the ANCP program. And once you are kind of like approved under that, then depending on the size of your organization, you can get funding from government. And I think when we did that analysis last year, the start of last calendar year, around January and February, I think we were saying that we'll be getting at a minimum $400,000 coming every year from the government because of the size of our organization. So that's quite massive when you think about the amount of money that we'll be getting to support the work of RAWCS in there. It also is worth mentioning that they co-fund your activities. So for example, if we have a project, let's say again in Nepal, and we have put in $200,000 there, oftentimes under this program, government would come and match that. So they'll give you another $200,000 so that you have a pool of $400,000 to implement that project. So that is what ANCP is for. And by the way, it's also important to highlight that the decision to proceed and become a member of ACFID actually predates me. When I joined the organization about 18 months ago or so, the board had already decided that we want to do this, and they actually told me that they were thinking about doing this for 3-4 years, but it was not done. And therefore, then when we developed our new strategic plan, we ensured that this was on top of that list. And as a result, we started working on it last year. In terms of the process that RAWCS went through to become a member of ACFID, at a high level, there were kind of like 5 main things that we did. The first thing was a comprehensive internal review was undertaken. I remember when I was doing that review, and the result of that was a document that was, I think, 80 or 85 pages long, which was actually saying what do we have as an organization in terms of policies and procedures, because we needed to take stock or an inventory of what we have already in place. And remember, RAWCS is an organization that is 60 years old or so. So there were policies and procedures that were developed across the age of this organization. And some of them were most up to date and recent and were contemporary. But there were a large number of them that were probably needing a lot of improvement to actually come to that best standard level that ACFID required. So that was the first thing that we did, which was an internal review. And as a result of that, as I said, there were a document 80 pages long that were developed, which actually then helped us understand and compare that with ACFID's requirements. So there was a cross-referencing that happened. And we said, okay, so ACFID requires all these 91 or 93 different things, and how many of those we actually have. We identified that there were some policies that we actually had. For example, we had a privacy policy, but the privacy policy that we had did not have all the ingredients that ACFID requires. For example, it didn't speak about how we were storing people's information, what did we do with those information, and what happens if there's a breach of private and confidential data and things like that. So therefore, by having a privacy policy did not mean that we actually met ACFID's requirements. It actually meant that there was more work that to be done. So that was the second stage that we went through, where a cross-reference between ACFID's requirement and what we had on board happened, which is again quite an extensive process. Took a lot of time from me earlier last year. And as a result of that, then we said, well, okay, this is quite a large piece of work. And the board decided that we actually go and bring in a consultant who could assist us with putting all those policies and procedures and frameworks that were actually identified as part of the two steps beforehand. It was a whole year's worth of work with that consultant, as a result of which we then developed 40 different policies and frameworks and guides and documents that were missing in that process. So you can imagine, if on average every one of these documents is, let's say, 15, 20 pages long, you can multiply that by 40, and that's the amount of work that was supposed to be developed. And what had happened was, once we developed them, we brought them to the board in 4 different tranches for board to actually review and endorse those. We put internally a committee that was formed of Merv, the National Projects Manager, because a lot of these policies had to do with international development work. We also had Belinda on that committee. Myself was on that committee. I believe that Sally, the consultant, was on that committee. I don't remember who else was there, but I think there was 1 or 2 other people as well. So there was an internal review of all those new policies and frameworks. That was, and John McLaren, by the way, sorry, I've forgotten John McLaren, who was chairing that committee. So we would review all those, and then we'll take it to the executives. RAWCS has multiple layers. The committee was working on it, then it was taking it to the executives. Executives were kind of like working on it as well, and then it was taken to the board, and the board was finally approving them. So all those 40 policies got approved in four different tranches. And as a result of that, then we were able to actually submit our application to ACFID with all those policies that we had developed. It's also worth mentioning and thanking also another committee that we put in place last year, on which sat Jan Pryor, Sue O'Neill, Tim Clark, Stewart. There were a few other people. Sorry if I don't remember everyone's name on that committee. Sorry, say that again, Belinda.
Stuart McIntyre.
Yeah, Stuart McIntyre. Yeah, there were a few other people who came together, who actually assisted to identify all these practices in the projects overseas. Because what ACFID required was not only these fancy new 40 policies and frameworks. They said, okay, how are you actually implementing some of these? Give us evidence of that. So we needed to collate evidence. That was another process that went for a good 3 to 6 months, where we collated a lot of evidence from projects, and that actually went as part of the application that was submitted to ACFID. We received that confirmation on the 16th of January, I think it was, or 18th of January this year. Now, what is happening from now onwards is that we have all those 40 policies or so that are operational, that are already approved by the board, that we need to be implementing. And in the meantime, ACFID is reviewing our application, and they tell us that it will be it usually takes about 18 months for them to issue the membership. And by the way, we're after full membership, not associate membership or partial membership. We're after full membership because that's what is required for the ANCP program. But we believe because of the quality of the work that was submitted, even ACFID told us that it could be not as long as 18 months because we are quite confident about the submission that we have made to them. So that's the extensive process that we went through. I believe that some of the credit of my gray hair goes to this process last year because it was quite complex to go through that whole thing. I mean, I give this example that RAWCS, if it was a house or a building, it was standing there for 60 years, and the ACFID process was to kind of like put this new 21st century kind of like requirements into this building that been standing there for quite a long time, like fiber optics and solar panels and things like that. So every place we touched really needed a lot of improvement, and therefore the creation of those 40 policies and frameworks. Again, before I proceed forward, I would stop here to see if there are any questions. I don't see them in the chat button, but I'll open it up for any questions verbally if people have questions. Otherwise, we'll proceed. Any questions? No. Okay, good. In terms of ACFID principles, as I said, one of the reasons why we wanted to become member of ACFID is because they are this best practice organization that sets standards for international development work. And if you think about RAWCS, RAWCS is an organization whose main role is to implement international development projects. Of course, about 80%, 78% of our projects right now are overseas. There are about 20 to 22% in Australia, but the bulk of our work is overseas international development projects. And this is an organization that sets best practice for that. And they have what they call ACFID principles, 9 categories of these ACFID principles, which I'd like to explain at a high level one by one. Within these 9 areas of principles, they have further indicators, and there are 93 of those. So we'll not go to those 93 of them, but just at a high level to give you a flavor of what it is that is required under those 9 ACFID principles. The first one is rights, justice, and safeguarding. What this means is that as an organization, we need to be respecting and protecting human rights and advancing social justice. There's no doubt that all of our international development projects do that. There's no doubt that we are not kind of like advancing human rights for people who are benefiting from our projects. But what ACFID wanted was a firm written commitment that as an organization is top of mind for us, that we are there for the right reasons. And by the way, don't get me wrong, there are some organizations that are not-for-profit organizations that may be out there for not particularly the right reasons. They may have other agendas or whatsoever, right? And unfortunately, the world has examples of organizations like that. So that is. Let me see where we don't have a. Okay, a mute. Okay. No, that's fine. This one happens from time to time. It's okay. Okay, I think we got that covered. There no background noise anymore. Okay, so that's one area. The second area is that we needed to ensure as an organization that when we go overseas and do these international development projects, that they are locally led, but we are also taking active steps to include people of the local communities in the design of those projects. Because oftentimes what happens, and by the way, from personal experience as well, coming myself from one of those countries that received a lot of aid and support from Western world, oftentimes you have people coming from other parts of the world who think that they know how to do things and how to actually assist you. and they had all these grand ideas and all that, and they'll come in and change the world without actually involving the local people. And therefore those projects were not sustainable because the know-how and the expertise only were with those people, and they came, implemented a project, and it was not sustainable after they left. So therefore, ACFID requires that whatever projects we are undertaking, that they are locally led, that we actually take active steps to ensure local people are included in that. And by the way, when we speak about inclusion, it's not only just one segment of the community. We needed to ensure that all sorts of people are included in that as well. The third area of ACFID's international development principles is systematic change, environmental sustainability, and climate action. What that means is that oftentimes organizations may be just treating symptoms, but not the root cause of why there's poverty in some of those countries, why there is inequality, why there are all sorts of issues. So it is important that international development work actually focus on the root causes rather than the symptoms, because if you treat symptoms and not the root cause, those symptoms will come again and again. So therefore, ACFID principles encourage you as an organization to ensure that you are thinking of systematic change at the root cause level, and also that as an organization you're aware of the climate and things like that, so that you can take action. In terms of quality and effectiveness, very important. Donors give donations thinking that the organizations or the projects that will be implemented would be implemented at the best possible way with best value for their money. So therefore, quality and effectiveness of those work is very important. We have also seen lots of examples of international development organizations who go there and they just have some numbers kind of like to report, but then there is no quality in that work. So that's another area. Collaboration, I mentioned this earlier, because many of the not-for-profit organizations that are of Australian origin operate overseas. It's very important for organizations like RAWCS to be collaborating with them so we can amplify our impact in those areas. And communication is another area that ACFID focuses on. And when it comes to communication, it's important that projects work is actually communicated in a transparent and honest way, and that the stakeholders are aware of what is happening there. Sometimes we just focus on fantastic stories. We don't tell the good, the ugly, and the bad, all of them. We just say what the good stories are there, and it's very important to actually tell it as it is, rather than kind of like censoring it. Governance is another area. You may remember when I came on board, one of the things that we identified at the time was that because of the external conduct standards that the ACNC requires to implement, one of the requirements is that if we are sending money overseas, we need to know which organization it is and who are those individuals that we are sending money to overseas. So we had to very quickly introduce an automatic process whereby every person now that we send funds overseas need to be checked. That person's name need to be checked against a list which is called the consolidated list. I think the reason why they came up with this term of consolidated list is because it's the Australian government list of all terrorist organizations or organizations that are under sanctions. It's also the UN sanctions. It's also the other countries' sanctions. They are all combined in one consolidated list. And every time we send funds, that person's name is checked against that so that we are not sending funds to someone who we don't know, who is not checked against the sanctions list or the consolidated list. So therefore, governance in ensuring that we protect the funds that are raised from donors are actually going to the right causes and to the right people is very, very important as well. Resources management is another area. It is actually making sure that we are ethically and responsibly managing the funds that we are receiving. And then finally, and not the least, of course, that is people and culture is very important when we do the work overseas, to ensure that our volunteers who go overseas people who are working in those projects and those partner organizations actually are of certain kind of like quality and caliber, and that all the people are treated fairly with respect and dignity, who are involved in our work. So those are kind of like the 9 main principles under which we were required to develop a set of policies, which is the next and final section that I'll be going to give you a flavor of what policies we had to develop to meet these requirements. Of course, I'll be not going through all the 40 policies and frameworks, otherwise I'll be sitting for a few days here to talk about that, but just a range of those I have selected for to share. So these are kind of like the main areas of ACFID's requirements. Again, I'll pause here to see if there are any questions, and I'll take some water because I've been talking. Questions? No questions. Good. Well, we move on. I think we're up for much shorter than 90 minutes webinar. That's good for all of us. Okay. So here is a selected list of some of those 40 policies and frameworks that we have developed. It's important that you understand it's not a comprehensive list. And even for the policies and frameworks that I have selected to showcase here, it's just an introduction, a high-level introduction only. It is not the policy itself. It's just an introduction to give you a flavor of what is covered in these policies and procedures. Okay, so the first one that I'm showcasing here is a child safeguarding policy. Now, in relation to the child safeguarding policy, we did have a policy of some sort here, and what we needed to do was to ensure that that the policy that we had in place was actually meeting all the requirements that ACFID actually expected us to have. So this new updated policy focus is to outline preventive and supportive measures in safeguarding children, and also to ensure that we protect them. It is a demonstration of commitment to child safeguarding. It is ensuring that people who work on our projects actually understand the expectations and responsibilities that they have when it comes to child safeguarding. And it is also providing them with guidance and responding to any concerns and allegations in the right way. Sorry, is okay. And also that we are setting high standards when it comes to personal behavior of people who are involved with children. Now, it's also important to highlight that not all our projects have children exposure to children, rather. Probably mainly those projects that focus on mother and children and education probably are the ones that have a lot of exposure to children. It doesn't mean that other projects of ours, because there are 7 areas of focus for us, do not get people to be exposed to children. Certainly, there would be cases like that as well, but the majority of focus of us working with children would be particularly, I believe, in those 2 areas. Is that correct, Belinda? Mother and children, and also education, or do you think there are other of the 7 areas of focus that would have a lot of interaction with children as well? My recollection is that probably those are the 2 main areas.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Education.
Yeah.
Orphanages.
Yeah. Okay, sure. I see that there's a question. Let me see. Okay, so we have Mani Records. How often is the consolidated list published? Is it available permanently online? That's one question. Okay, to answer Mani's question, the consolidated list is available online. It is constantly updated. So there is no such thing as information of that at certain intervals. One of the reasons why we had to introduce it in a digital forum was that we wanted our system to automatically in the background talk to that consolidated list because government or other organizations like UN may be adding people or organizations to that list all the time. So therefore, we didn't want to kind of like have a static list. We wanted to have access to the ongoing updated list. It is available online. It's for everyone to see. We do not have any monopoly over that. It's a public document. So yes, you can have a look. It's available publicly, called Consolidated List under DFAT. Okay, so that's one. The second one, I have a message, can't display content. I cannot see any PowerPoint display. Ooh, okay. Think we have just lost our display. I'll bring that back again, but I hope that you were able, Alan, to see the display previously, that this may be just an issue for the past minute or so. Okay, so that's, we'll bring that back. Okay, another question. That's from Tim Clark. A question for later in the presentation. I know that membership of ACFID is not cheap. What is an indicative cost of membership and what benefits can we expect to offset those costs? Okay, good question. I have the same problem, which is from John. Okay, we'll bring the presentation back. And also in the meantime, I'll actually, give me 1 second. And Max is saying that he had this issue from the start. Was that an issue from the start in the room?
No.
No. Okay. Can I
We've got it
other
now,
people
mate,
also?
here. We've got it now, mate, here.
You have it now, but the question
Yeah,
I was
we've got-
asking is whether you had access to my display of PowerPoint presentation from the beginning or no. That's the question I'm asking.
Yeah, we had it right from the start, even when you were scrolling through it initially before you started. We've had it right from 10 o'clock.
That's what I'm seeing in the room also. There are other people in this room where I am, and they have access to that also. Okay, so Max, I don't know if there's an issue at your end with your computer, but we see from other people that they have had access to it. However, because this is being recorded, Max, you will be able to actually then go and see the recording of it where they aid the PowerPoint recording as well. And we'd be also happy to share the PowerPoint with you also. Okay, now I'll answer Tim's question in terms of the cost. Look, the cost of membership itself is not huge. It's, I think, from memory, about $2,000 annually. So that's not an expensive thing to do in its own right. However, because we have put all these policies and procedures in place, these policies and procedures need to be implemented. And the cost of actual implementation is in relation to the time that people will be spending, particularly project managers in the field, to ensure that when they're working, let's say with children, that they are aware of our child safeguarding policies and that they implement those things. So that is the cost that will be associated with it, not the actual financial cost that we'll be paying to ACFID for membership. I hope that answers your question, Tim. If not, then I'll come back to it later. Okay, so that's one of the policy. The other one is a commitment to human rights. As I said earlier, it's not that we did not have a commitment to human rights before, but what ACFID members are required to do is to have a written, very conscious commitment to human rights and actually say it so that there is no doubt about in the mind of anyone involved with that organization that there are gray areas. For example, our commitment to human rights statement, which is now available on our website, say that we are dedicated to respecting, protecting, promoting human rights for all individuals, regardless of their race, religion, ethnicity, indigeneity, disability, age, displacement, caste, gender identity, sexuality, sexual orientation, poverty, class, or socio-economic status. Now, the reason why these are very deliberately mentioned here is because we operate in all sorts of countries. For example, cost may be an issue in some part of the world, in some countries, but that may not be an issue in other parts of the world. So therefore, it's very important to mention all these things because where we operate in these countries internationally, if they are going to our website and they see that we have a commitment to protecting them, then they can be at ease and will be comfortable in working with us because they would know that we actually know the lays of the land and how to actually respectfully engage with those communities. So therefore, that commitment to human rights is a requirement, actually, one of the very first requirements of becoming a member of ACFID. The statement is available on our website and you can see them. Another one is partnerships and collaborations. I can't emphasize enough to how important it is to collaborate with other organizations when we are overseas, particularly, or in Australia as well. I personally have a focus on this. You'll see more from me in this regard. We have started on a journey of partnerships in the international arena. You'll soon hear great news from us that we have now officially partnered with UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. It's a UN body, a United Nations body. We have signed an MOU with them. And as part of that MOU, we'll be doing two main things with them. One, we'll be collaborating with them to assist people in the of the Turkey and Syria earthquakes that happened in 2023, and we raised funds for that. We have not been able to fully acquit those funds. So we needed a quality partner organization to acquit those funds in a responsible way. And UNHCR is the organization that will be partnering with that. But more broadly, we have our new partnership with them would actually give us access to each one of your projects that are overseas to UNHCR to see if at those local levels a collaboration and partnership would be beneficial. Because I personally believe, having worked almost all my professional life in the international development space with the United Nations, with the World Bank, with other not-for-profit organizations, that when you collaborate with other not-for-profit organizations, the impact that you create is by far greater, and it is by far greater amplified rather than you just working alone. For example, if we become a partner with World Food Organization, which is WFP, which is another organization that we will be reaching out to. Let's say if they are operating in Uganda and they provide food or wheat, and we are also running a school, let's say in Uganda, again, I'm just making this as an example, then we may be able to actually have a partnership with them where they can give us food, which we can actually use in our school or in our orphanage and all that. So therefore, that support is coming to support our orphanage in those places. And when you combine efforts like that, actually the impact becomes very, very big. So we'll have a particular focus. I'm personally focused on that myself. And I encourage you, if you have projects overseas, to actually think of what type of partnerships you can have locally with local organizations or with international organizations to multiply and amplify the impact that you're creating as an organization. I'll stop again there to see if there are any questions. Okay, so Alan, Max, and John are saying that they can't see the display of our content. Look, as I said, I don't know as to what's happening at your end in terms of your computers, but I believe the majority of people who are here today can see the screen in my presentation. Please give me thumbs up if you can see my screen. Yeah, thumbs up if you can see my screen. If not, then okay, yeah, you see most people. Peter, how about yourself? Peter Coins, can you see my screen? Please give us thumbs up.
Unfortunately, no, I can't.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Never mind, I'll look at the recording later on.
Okay. John?
Yes, the recording should be complete.
Okay, yeah. So we'll share with you the recording. And at the same time, also what I'll then recommend is that anyone who has joined today, if you leave your email addresses, I'll make sure that we send you the PowerPoint. So that way then you have access to the PowerPoint. let's say if you don't want to listen to the whole 90 minutes or 60 minutes recording later, you can just have access to the PowerPoint presentation and you can read it at your pleasure. Please type away your email addresses in the chat button if you can't see the display. Okay, so I'll proceed. Another one of our policy that we have developed is the one called non-development activity policy. It's interesting, when I was putting this together again yesterday, I was not sure whether the term itself was defining what it is, because it said non-development activity policy. I think the policy should have been saying, again, this is a requirement in the broader sector. I believe it should have been saying development activity policy rather than non-development activity policy. Let me explain what it is. So we as a not-for-profit organization are required that when we undertake projects, particularly overseas or in Australia, that those projects actually have a development focus to them. I think it's given that all our work is development focused, that there is no commercial activity or anything like that happening. But again, it is another one of those commitments that we as an organization need to make very consciously, to say that, okay, our focus would be on development work. We will not entertain non-development activities. We'll ensure that our projects address root causes of disadvantage, and that we'll promote sustainable livelihoods, that we'll promote education, health, and all that, and that this is not about anything that is non-development. Again, because I've spent a lot of my professional career in the international development space, I've seen organizations that had a banner of development, or NGOs or not-for-profit organizations sometimes would come in and would do commercial projects that would be very kind of like, and you were not sure as to how those funds were used at the end of the day when they made money from the commercial activities. I know that there are social enterprises and all sorts of organizations, but whatever we do, whether if there are any proceeds from our activities, we need to ensure that those proceeds go back to support our development activities. And then whistleblower protection policy. This sector that we operate in is based on integrity, based on doing the right thing. And if there is any fear that organizations or projects are not doing the right thing, people are encouraged to actually speak up and actually report those things that are not done right, especially when it comes to international development. And those people who blow the whistle on that, there's a protection for them. There are protections in Australia under the whistleblower protection policies, but at the same time, there are expectations in the international development space that you protect your whistleblowers. So we hope that there is nothing wrong that is happening today or in the past or in the future in our projects. But God forbid, if there are situations like that or fears that there may be something wrong happening, then we needed to ensure that we had a very clearly stipulated whistleblower protection policy in place as well. Volunteers policy, this is probably one of the biggest ones. We send hundreds of volunteers every year overseas. One of the repercussions or side effects of being a member of ACFID that requires or sets the best standard in international development is that when you have volunteers and they'll be exposed to vulnerable people, particularly children, people of disability, elderly or other people, it's important that we actually know who those volunteers are and we actually ensure that we support those volunteers, but at the same time we make sure that that the environment that we are creating for them is actually a safe environment as well for the volunteers themselves, but also for the people who will be receiving the benefit of our projects. So this updated volunteers policy is very, very detailed. It actually says as to what we'll be doing in terms of providing support to our volunteers, in terms of defining responsibilities and relationship between our paid staff and volunteers, and also people who are receiving services of our volunteers. We also needed to ensure that our policies were in line with Volunteering Australia's national standards for volunteers of 2015, and that we had the right mechanisms in place to support our volunteers. So that is another one. Fraud, corruption, and counterterrorism. Unfortunately, where we operate, the way we operate as an Australian organization is often different to how other organizations operate in other countries. So therefore, it's very important that we have very clear guidelines on how to prevent fraud, how to prevent corruption, and how to prevent supporting terrorism and countering terrorism in our work overseas. The last one is community needs assessment framework. On this particular one, we, after very long deliberations with Sally and others, we decided that we'll be going with the Rotary's or the Rotary International's community needs assessment framework that is available publicly on their website as well, which is a very, very comprehensive document. And kudos to Rotary and gratitude to Rotary International for putting that in place, because when there are resources like that, it means that organizations like us, which are MDOs or MDIOs, as they may be called these days, we do not need to reinvent the wheel and reinvent those things. So we are encouraging a project to actually make use of the community needs assessment framework to actually ensure that when they start a project, before they start a project, that they actually do a thorough assessment of needs, that they know why they are establishing this school in this particular village in Nepal and not the other village, why they're working with this particular community and not the other community, why they're working with these set a group of people in not other people, how they're embedding and including views of different people, diverse backgrounds in those communities, how they're ensuring that they will actually have a community-led approach to it rather than, oh, you know what, I have come from overseas and I know it best and you have to do it this way because I bring you the money and I actually fund your project. So therefore, it's very, very important that right from the get-go, we get these projects right. We do it in a respectful way, in joint partnership with communities, keeping in mind that these projects that we deliver are sustainable, that when we depart from there, that we are sure that these projects would continue, or that if they don't continue, they actually have met their purpose that they are intended for. So this is kind of like a flavor of what is included in there in terms of the 40 policies and frameworks that we had to develop. It is actually included on our website. If you can see my screen, for those of you who can see my screen, if you go to our website and scroll to the footer, there's a section called policies. So that is the section where you have most of these policies in there. But also, if you go to the Rotarian Center, there's also another section of project-related policies and manuals. So I would encourage you to go and have a look and familiarize yourself with these policies and manuals and guides, because these are the policies that are already in effect. They are endorsed by the board, and there's an expectation that they are fully enforced from the date of their endorsement by the board. So I'll now open it to questions. And I'll now stop sharing. Ooh, lots of talking.
Mahir, other than there's only really one question. Will there be dot point list available that we can pass on to the clubs? Bearing in mind that the presentation should be on the website, and if anybody's shared their email address, then they'll get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. So, yeah. So, is there going to be a dot point presentation there as well?
Well, the presentation would be actually there. And I'm not sure if you have the presentation that then you need actually a dot point as well, because the presentation itself is going to explain what is there, isn't it? Yes, but I can't emphasize enough.
I can
go on, please.
I can put the PowerPoint presentation on the web on the web
as well.
Yeah, okay. Great. Yeah, you can do that. That'd be good. But what I wanted to say, I can't emphasize enough that it becomes the individual responsibility of our project managers and project people to familiarize themselves with these policies. Because I don't know if that'd be a correct analogy here. You know, when new laws are introduced in a country, then it's the job of those countries to, the citizens to actually familiarize themselves. I don't know if that's the right analogy, but something similar here. These are policies that the board has passed. Our job as management was to ensure that you as implementers are aware of this. And when we say implementers, we are also implementers. All of us are. So it's important that we actually go through and reach out to me or to Belinda or to John Robertson if you have any questions about any of these policies. We believe that there be a process that people will go through to familiarize themselves with. They may have questions, and we are here to answer any of those questions. Tim Clark.
Yeah, very good presentation, Mahir. Question I have is whenever someone decides to set up a Rotary project, Rotary to Rotary Australia Overseas Aid Fund or something like this, they go in. There's a series of questions that they have to sort of make sure they're aware of before they start filling out the procedure. Now that when we get the ACFID accreditation, are you also going to put those the dot points for those 9 categories of the active principles that they have to be aware of when they're actually preparing an application for an overseas aid fund RAWCS number?
Very good question, Tim. There are 2 aspects of that. One is we've already started embedding the requirements of the ACFID policies and frameworks into our own processes. For example, Belinda, Merv, and Cameron, John Robertson, all 4 of them to a certain degree, myself, been working on embedding the requirements of volunteers into our volunteer registration form now. So if you go there, whatever is required of our volunteers in terms of like ensuring that they tick the boxes, that they are aware of all the requirements, that is now being introduced as part of our new onboarding for volunteers. So that's already happening. Another example there is now we have new MOUs or new agreement that we'll be signing with any organization from now onwards. For example, if we are working in Nepal with in partnering with another organization in there, from now onwards, they have to actually sign this new MOU or this new agreement, which is different than the previous one, because this actually requires new things and probably a bit comprehensive than what we had before. So those are the types of things that as an organization, the management here are working on introducing, because we want to embed everything. We don't want the new policy to be sitting in isolation and not being embedded. So that's one thing that's happening. The second thing that I wanted to say here was that the policies are available for all project managers to actually see and ensure that they are aware of the requirements, because them reading it and understanding it is one thing, and us kind of like explaining at a high level is another thing. So yes, we are definitely take care of that.
Okay, thank you.
Did that answer your question, Tim?
Pretty much, yes. It's just that I know that because I've done it, I've registered a couple myself, and also I'm the project manager for the Sanderson Trust, which sort of gets draws on funds. There is when you first start to do it, there is a document said, print this document out and read it. I'm just wondering whether there would be, just to enlighten people, saying, right, if you are going to do an overseas aid fund project, right, these are the 9 active principles that you have to ensure you comply with. just if you just document them so they are aware of them before they start to fill out the the registration for a RAWCS project number.
Okay, so that aspect, the way we have taken care of that, Tim, is that the 9 principles are like broad principles, right?
Yeah.
We had to read in by the way, within each one of them, there are multiple requirements, and in
Yes,
total, there are 191 or 93. What we had to do as an organization was to say, okay, these are the requirements. What policies we have right now that already cover some of those requirements, and what is missing. So then we had to introduce the policies. So if we are following our policies that we have introduced, the 14 new ones and the existing ones, we're actually taking care of all the 9 requirements. So the requirement of ACFID is not for us to be simply aware of the 9 areas. It's actually for us to have it in our policies, which is the work that we have done. It took us a whole 12 months to develop those new policies.
Right, but so that when you do put in an application, so when someone does actually go into the website and starts to fill out the application, and you've got to say who the clubs are involved and everything, this is all that is now compliant with ACFID's requirements in terms of what they fill out and the boxes they check and click and say.
Yeah,
and
yes.
Also the audit report, the 6 monthly audit reporting, that will also make sure that they continue to be in compliance.
Yes, I'll invite John Robertson to speak about that because he's been very deeply involved with that aspect. John Robertson?
Yes, I'm not sure my sound is good, but yes, we're trying to implement all of these in the automated application projects for projects and for volunteers. And the audit reports are being updated as well. It's a fairly time-consuming process, and it will take a short time to get it all in place. But effectively, the majority of the compliance for an application as a volunteer and for the application of any new project has been done. We may have to add more, but it's most of that is in place now. So if you went to register a new project, you would find new policies that you've got to actually sign off on and have your IP address recorded as having cited them.
Yep.
So, that's as much as we can do. Then you as the project manager have to apply them.
Yeah, thanks for that, John.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. It's just that, if someone comes to me in my role as, sort of central region coordinator, I can say to them, well, if you do all the paperwork and everything like this, not only will you be complying with the ATO requirements, DFAT requirements, RAWCS requirements, you'll also be complying with ACFID requirements, and you have to be aware that you have to make sure you continue to comply with these through the life of the project. So yeah, as long as we've got that, so I can tell people that's what's happening. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Look, we are up for a record short webinar, which, as I jokingly said earlier, is thanks to my presentation being so clear that there are no questions, or thanks to the bad sound in technology that you could not hear what I was talking about, so therefore you don't have any questions. It's one of those two.
I have a comment if we have time.
Yeah. Yes, we definitely have a lot of time, Marnie.
I know I'm not very active in RAWCS now, but I've got some experience on the ECS and the ACFID side of things.
Well, we always welcome you, Marnie, whether you're very active or less active.
Thanks. Thinking about some of the wonderful program managers who are not as policy savvy and policy literate as I think a lot of the people on this call, you really, if there's some way to assist them to really understand the policies and the meaning behind the policies, which is around good governance, which is around essentially impact of the money that you raise. It all comes back to the impact part. One suggestion I would make, is that you could possibly look at something like creating a multiple choice questionnaire on a very simple app like SurveyMonkey. We've probably all filled in one of those, that's been sent to us, which could be used as a reminder of, what is the intention of the policy, and then people could take that when they're setting up a new project, or they could even take it every year. It could be a static survey every year as a reminder of what the point of the policies are. Because you're going to find that people, they're just going to tick and flick. And what you really want to be able to do is when you give people these policies, is them to understand that they're actually a tool. They're not just a burden. So that's just one comment that I'd make. I think it's the same issue that a lot of other organisations are facing, that, that blockage between what is just paperwork and what is actually, what does it mean for my program supporting this rural hospital in Papua New Guinea?
That's a very good comment, Marnie. Thanks for making that. The reality is that we as with every organization, but particularly here, it's a juggling act of what's the kind of like fine balance between how much people want to kind of like spend time on this thing. Because I remember we received feedback on even 90-minute webinar was too long. So this webinar that we are doing today, we've received feedback previously that, well, a 90 minutes webinar too long and it should be shortened. We also, we introduce new things, rightly so, or probably not. We receive feedback from people saying, oh, you're creating now new requirements and things like that, because this has not been done before, right? So therefore, we are kind of like slowly working towards a process of where actually these new things strengthen the work of our project managers in the field rather than is a burden. And by us creating partnerships and then giving them real kind of like visible results as a result of a partnership that is better than what they were doing before, I think slowly and gradually we'll be moving in a direction where they say, oh, okay, these things are actually good, they actually create more kind of like than what we were doing before. So yeah, definitely things like that. But also what John Robertson mentioned earlier in response to Tim's question, we have actually embedded or are embedding now some of these requirements into our project registration thing. So people can't even register a project unless they know the meaning and the intent behind these things. So we are putting a range of things in terms of controls, in terms of education, in terms of kind of like ensuring people are aware of the intent and the meaning behind these things.
Yeah, which is so important. But I think the difference that I'm getting at is that, there's a range of things as you as the board need to be able to say that you've told your program managers and that they understand. And so you telling them to read the policies and understand them before they sign a project up is part of your responsibility as a board.
Yeah, it's a fiduciary responsibility, yes.
Let's flip it around. What are they taking that information in? Because that's the second part of it. It's not what you want to say, it's what are they actually hearing? And something, I'm just like a survey or whatever format it is, it could be like, a 10-minute video talking about it, whatever. It doesn't have to be difficult. Something where they actually, for them, that they're taking it in. It's based on them understanding the policy, not you doing your job of governance by getting them to tick that they've read the policy. It's like it's about an adult learning thing. So sorry, I've gone off on a tangent, but just to make that difference between.
That's a very good point. Look, I would love to introduce that, and I'll have a chat with Belinda about that, because Belinda would have views about this, because this would be again seen now a new thing, a new requirement, and people are actually. The response we have gotten before, every time we introduce new thing, was, oh, now this is now more work for us. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? No?
The only comment was Val Bland says there will be a presentation at the RAWCS this coming weekend at Eastern Region.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What sort of a presentation, Val? No, there won't be.
No. I
There
can't
won't be.
unmute. No.
Oh,
No,
will
the
there?
presentations are
Oh,
already allocated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
fair
but
enough.
I thought that
I've
there
used-
is going to be presentation from project people on their projects. Isn't that what she's asking?
Yeah, Val,
Yeah, can you unmute me or am I unmuted?
no, you're unmuted. So
Yes.
Val, there is presentations this weekend, but
Yeah,
not
but
from us.
Nothing about this.
No. This is why we're having the webinar.
Right. Well, how many project managers are on the webinar? Not too many.
Yeah, but they can always look at, have a look at the webinar later on.
Right. Well, that's if they know.
Well, they're all invited. That's the thing.
Yeah, not too many.
And I'm
Here.
sure that someone will announce at the Eastern region that it's available.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for making time. We will see you at that last webinar that's planned for the fundraising. I see there's something else from